Good evening, paranormal community, and thank you for partaking in another episode of the Odyssey Files. I'm your host, Michael O'Neill. With me, as always, just barely making it on with 13 seconds before we go live on the air, is my co-host, Mr. David Sawyer. Good evening, Dave.
Good evening, Mike. Good evening, paranormal community. That was a close one. You know what I think happened? I think that I was using my work camera for the last couple of weeks.
And you switched back, didn't you?
Yeah, because I had to take my work stuff back to work because I'm working back at the office now. And I think this camera got a little jealous that it was sitting on the sidelines. And so it didn't want to respond. So anyway.
So kind of like the
we're
difference
friends again now.
between Thor's storm chaser or whatever the hell it is and his Major or whatever hammer that was jealous that he got a new one,
right?
And wanted to give you some attitude.
Yep, I think that's what happened. That's what I'm going with anyway.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Well,
shout out to the Vikings who won a preseason game after 10 straight preseason losses in a row.
And so it begins.
Yeah, the season has begun, baby. Every
Sunday, it's going to be, it was a great win today, or it's going to be, well, they came close, but they lost it in the last 30 seconds.
Yeah, we'll see. Hopefully it's going to be a whole lot of the former, not the latter.
No, it'll be much, much more of the latter. That's okay. That's okay, because it's the Vikings. And people just don't have high hopes for them, Dave. I'm sorry. But who we do have high hopes for is our guest tonight. He is one of our favorite people to bring on. Always an amazing guest, and we got a whole slew of topics to talk about with him tonight. So he's an author of many books on legends from the Bridgewater Triangle down into the Florida. Lecturer, paranormal investigator, and podcast host of Tripping on Legends, a haunted tour guide, and I think most importantly, a teacher. Well, yeah, okay, but whatever. Anyway, you got me there.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Christopher Balzano.
Making his first appearance ever being compared to the Vikings. What's up with that?
Wait a minute. Oh, I was going to say, I didn't. Yes, I did. I said we had hopes for you, but no hopes for the Vikings.
My parents too had hopes for me, and it went a lot like the Vikings. So,
ouch.
There's a lot of Viking trashing going on here in the first 30 seconds of this episode. Not liking it.
Sorry.
That's all right.
I really like their uniforms, if that means anything.
Sure, absolutely.
No, really,
great
really
color,
doesn't.
purple.
All right, beautiful.
Yep.
Yeah, wait a minute, those Vikings. Just kidding. Yeah.
If you're talking about the Norse, residents, then yes, I agree.
The first football game that I ever watched from beginning to end was a Vikings game.
And how much did they lose by?
I have no idea. They lost. I can tell you that. And I can tell you it was against the Eagles. And I had watched little fragments of football, and it was Herschel Walker days.
Ooh.
And Herschel Walker returned a kickoff. And he returned the opening kickoff for a touchdown.
Well, that's impressive because he's a big, lumbering man.
I'm with you. And I think it was like one of those – it was at the point that we're like, we don't even really like him anymore. Just put him back at kickoffs. Yeah. Because he was definitely not a kickoff specialist, right, or anything like that. And I'm pretty sure, and I could be wrong, that it's the game where he fumbled the ball, while they were trying to kill the clock, and the Eagles got the field goal.
Yep.
And I was like, wow, this sport is amazing. Maybe I'll watch less hockey. I don't know. So
I'm glad we could be your introduction into the National Football League. So I'll take that as a little bit of solace.
Thank you for being gentle. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I cannot say Herschel Walker returning kickoffs, so that's like Earl Campbell returning kickoffs, right?
Maybe
just like 4 feet wide.
It was just like he broke. Maybe it was like he just broke a really, really long run.
Yeah.
and I'm remembering it wrong, which
That's-
has a lot to do with paranormal, so we can segue back into that. So
Yeah. That would be really weird, like almost paranormal weird if I saw him return a kickoff. But
that's why I'm thinking like I had to have gotten it wrong.
No, I think you got it right.
I'm with you
So
anyway.
I'm going to try one thing here really quick.
Yeah.
Yep, I was right. It is Dave. So, yeah, your microphone is has this.
That's what happened when he switched over from his OnlyFans camera. Work camera. Sorry, I'm a little on tonight. It must be my tea.
Let me see. Maybe it's.
Well, OnlyFans has gone downhill then. That's for sure.
Oh, come on. I'm getting beat up on this show.
Yes, you are. So let's beat up on Chris a little bit.
Please.
Okay.
So I'm having trouble figuring out exactly where I want to go first. So
Okay.
I think what I'm going to do is take the post that you had done on Facebook that I saw.
Okay.
That reminded me that you had not been on in a long time, and that this is something that I think would be an interesting topic.
Okay.
So, and that is the show Evil.
Yeah.
Great show.
On CBS. Now it's on Paranormal Plus or Paranormal Plus, Paramount Plus. And for those of you who've never seen the show, basically Luke Cage and Asif Mamvi and some lady who I don't know or can't remember her name anyway, work for the church, and they go out and they try to either prove or disprove paranormal happenings or evil. So there's a lot of exorcisms and demons and yada
trying
yada.
to defeat the evil forces of Ben from Lost.
Exactly. So I've watched the first couple seasons. I really enjoyed it, and then it just kept getting more and more stupid. But
please.
So it's my own opinion.
It didn't have any glee in it. I'll give you that. There was no glee happening in it, so you probably were really disappointed.
Well, maybe if they had a musical episode, which give it time, they will.
I hope not.
We will. I'll watch it again. But anyway, it just went way out in left field. Well, anyway, your post, Chris, was you thought from your hosting Tripping on Legends that maybe the writers were stealing your ideas for the show. And right. I just, and since I hadn't seen the new episodes except for like the promos, which completely turned me off from it, I would like to get your reasoning behind why you thought that.
Okay, first of all, they do have a musical episode. Let's not forget the episode where all the Catholic schoolgirls couldn't stop singing the song.
The earworm.
The earworm.
Yep.
And
shocker.
And then the woman was hidden within her social media posts. Yeah, first of all, I think that you either love or you hate Evil. I think it's one of the most original shows to be on television in like the last 20 years. And what I love about it is that it's so unapologetically itself. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like, which is maybe why it's been canceled after only 4 seasons, but it's kind of like, if you don't like us there, that's fine. There's plenty of other things. Go watch a procedural that like makes sense or whatever. But it's hard to understand if either I'm not original in this world and we all just cover the same paranormal topics, or whether it's some kind of synchronicity, which I think has a lot to do with it. Like this idea of things kind of sprouting up spontaneously. Like, so when people talk about the term urban legend, they really use the term to describe any ghostly thing or any weird thing or any story that's repeated. When in actuality, an urban legend has very specific guidelines, right? And one of the guidelines is that these stories pull up spontaneously in multiple places at the same time, right? So if you take like the clown craze, the creepy clown craze of 1982, it started in Boston. Like that's the first place where you can really trace things back to. but the same police departments all across the country at the same time were experiencing this influx of calls of ghosts of clowns trying to abduct and kill kids when that wasn't happening, right? So urban legends are supposed to be these stories where you hear it and you go, wait a minute, I've heard that before, because you can't trace it back to an origin, right? It just goes pop, 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 pop. So maybe it's a case of that, because I don't think I'm popular enough that evil is stealing from me. But it is crazy how over the last few seasons, I'll do an episode of my show. We did an episode called The Elevator Game. And it was just elevators, all about elevators and creepy urban legends. And the primary focus of it was the actual, it's called the Elevator Game. Next week on Lost, next week on Evil, they had an entire episode dedicated to the Elevator Game. And then this season it was crazy because my daughter and I, we watch it together. That's how we bond when we're not watching Glee together. And
you're a good father, Chris.
Every episode, well, we're big into musical theater and musicals and things like that. That's her life. And every episode was something we had covered on the show. And it wasn't even just, and I'm not talking things like as generic as ghosts, gin, hitchhiker legends. I'm talking very specifically. We had just done an episode on. It's actually, I still need to post it on cursed phone numbers. And one of the legends we discussed, I can't remember the woman's name. It was Lucia something, and she talked about. She didn't talk about it. It's supposed to be this person approaches you on Facebook, really, really late at night, and contacts you through Messenger. When you accept the message, all of a sudden she starts to activate other devices in your house. And then when you look at it, eventually you're talking to her via camera and she appears right next to you. Right? Like, and it's a picture, it's a trick. It's like a con, right? But it's got this like ghostly tint to it. And we're watching the episode and that exact same thing plays out. And we had just recorded the episode like a week before that. Now, obviously, they don't have a week turnaround to write, produce, like, especially because all those episodes are done, right? Like they're all, they're all having to, they those were in the can like 6 months ago. Sorry, I got my thing is popping up. But it was one of those things where that has happened time and time again. The episode where, spoilers if you haven't watched it, but there's a girl in the kind of at the sleepover. She's a neighbor, and she wears a mask the whole time, right? She won't take the mask off, and she sends them out to the graveyard, to the cemetery, and they have to nail something to the cemetery. And I'm like, oh, this is like the urban legend. I was literally pulling out my book of urban legends. The big book of urban legends, which was the foundation of my show. Like I started my show because of this one book. And we're going story after story after story is an evil. So I think there's kind of like a cosmic connection between these themes. And I just, for some reason, I don't know if it's because I like to think of myself on like the cutting edge, especially of like digital legends, or if it's just like they're generic enough that everybody's doing them. So I don't know. Damn good show though.
It is a great show.
Yeah.
And and if they are stealing from you, what a greater compliment could you get than that?
Really, it's so sometimes I'm doing research. There's a guy here, I don't know if he's ever been on your show, named Mark Muncy, who recently moved to North Carolina, so he's not nearly as active. And we're very similar. We cover very similar topics, but we're very different people. And so we approach the legends and the ghostly legends and these things from different perspectives and produce something different. And it used to kill the crap out of me because he started doing a show. And I'm like, I'm doing research on Tate's Hell, and so I'm going to cover Tate's Hell, and we're going to do an episode on that. And then I see he puts out an episode about Tate's Hell. And I'm like, well, now I can't do it because now I seem like the follower. So I can't tell you how many of my show ideas I've trashed because Mark Muncy, who's not even in Florida anymore, is doing the same topic. And I'm like, you have to wonder, these things are not, it's not ripped from today's headlines, right? It's not SVU or something like that. So it's like, why would people simultaneously come up with the same idea and create a narrative around it? Is kind of weird.
It's global consciousness.
Yeah, or I'm in the right place, right? I'm doing it the right way. If like it's one of those things where if they're showing it and people are liking it, then maybe I'm tapping into a need that people have, a desire, if you will.
You just need to be quicker.
I'm doing my stuff and then they're copying it. They're arrogant. I can't, predict.
I'm at Muncie
in a few weeks. What'd you say?
I'm at Muncie.
Oh yeah, he's fine. Well, he's in North Carolina now, so I got my own space. Good guy though.
So, I mean, obviously, like Supernatural, like Evil, they're going to books. They're going to the internet. They're going to try to find the most popular urban legends out there and then write episodes about them.
Yeah.
So, I mean, do you think that maybe they've picked up one or two of your books?
I don't think so. I really don't.
That's the spirit.
But here's what I'll say. I think that they probably have picked up the same books that I've picked up to do my research and to get my inspirations. So there's a website that's out there that's called Ghosts in Your Machine, ghostinyourmachine.com. And it is such a ridiculously amazing website. And it's really on the cutting edge of digital legends. And being a high school teacher and working with teens and having two teens, I want to know where the pulse is, right? And so I visit this site all the time. And we've covered so many things that were inspired by that site that I actually, when I go to, I do it at library events or conventions, whatever, I sell her book, which is called Games to Play in the Dark or something like that. Mysterious Games to Play in the Dark. And it's more popular than my books and gets stolen a lot from my table, actually. So I think that they're probably... When we started tripping on legends, we went through a book called Lore of the Ghost. And I really wish I could remember the writer because he was a constant guest on when I used to book for Spooky South Coast. We would have this guy on all the time, Ghosts of the Lore or Lore of the Ghost. And it was a great book and it was really like foundational. I think things like that, we're picking up the same resources necessary. I don't think they're buying Haunted Objects by Chris Balzano and writing a story about a haunted soap dish, but still.
Watch out for the haunted soap dish.
It's in the book, so it wasn't my story; it was my co-author's story, but it's in there. So,
well, I'm sure that if Evil were to get another season, which they won't, that I'm sure that would have been one of the episodes.
The haunted soap dish?
The haunted soap dish. There's going to be it's an evil soap dish. Everyone that owns it died in the shower. Something like that. It's going to be something just ridiculous like that. And
it's never exactly the same, right? Like some things are pretty dead on. It's never exactly the same, but you can tell that this is the stuff that scares the crap out of people. These are the ideas, that lonely highway where certain things happen. The digital pet. We had done an episode on digital pets, and there was this whole thing about people like breaking into a digital pet and reprogramming it to not like black people, right? And it was it was an episode.
Yeah, I heard that. Yeah.
I'm trying to think of what jailbreak. They jailbroke it. I hadn't heard the term jailbreaking something, like jailbreaking your phone, in probably 10 years, but they jailbroke this robot so that they could reprogram it to do things. And then we had done a whole thing on superconductors and the potential of what we're opening up in terms of the paranormal for that. And then they did a whole episode on superconductors. So it's really, I think what scares the crap out of me scares the crap out of the writers of Evil. So they should hire me on if they ever write a movie.
There you go.
Or my daughter, because she's better than me. So
it's where Ben took the particle to the head. I'm still waiting to see how that pans out.
Yeah. And okay, so again, and this was one of the things that really drew me to Evil, is that we really don't know whether all of this is real,
Right.
or whether it's just the psychosis of the people involved, right? And so, especially that first season, you didn't know whether everyone was just crazy, or hallucinating, or like, biased on things, or whether they were actually demonic forces. And I don't think we've really even had that question answered, because everyone on the show has that touch of evil to them and a touch of badness to them. And they really kind of play I think that's a really interesting thing, because I'm still in that mode when I'm looking at Legends, right? Like, are these ghostly stories, did they ever actually happen? Or is this in people's minds? Like, are they taking a natural phenomenon, making it supernatural? Are they, is it one of those things that they've been told that this kind of thing happens so often in a location that they are making it happen, manifesting it, or just like misinterpreting? Like, that's kind of what tracking down ghostly legends is all about as well. So kind of fits in.
Well, one of the things that I wanted to ask, since you brought it up, was that website. What did it, Ghost in Your Machine?
Yeah, Ghosts in Your Machine, like Ghosts in the Machine, but it's the word "your" instead of "the."
Right. So, I mean, that's almost it reminds me a lot of the Topa episode of Supernatural, where those two lunatic or idiot investigators or whatever were posting the stuff on their website, and it was bringing people from all over the world, and because of that, what they were posting was becoming real because of the thought process behind it. So, I mean, do you think, in your opinion, that if this is a place where you go and that is very popular, where people can find legends and they can find that stuff, that maybe it's a triggering point for creating these legends to be real?
I think that it's either it can potentially be creating something, or it could be basically like putting a big old neon sign out of something and other things coming to the location because they know people's eyes are open there, So if you have a place, for example, where you see the red-headed hitchhiker of Route 44, which is a Bridgewater Triangle thing, is a great example of this. People who have tracked that legend through the years, they've seen him, driving down, they've stopped, it's classic hitchhiker legend. But then there was this other thing kind of added to it, which was if you stop your car and you're right on the border of Rehoboth, Massachusetts and Seekonk, Massachusetts, and you turn your lights off, right? And you honk your horn 3 times. When you turn your lights back on, the red-headed hitchhiker will be there in front of you, right? I think that so many people have now done that if I'm a ghost and I'm not getting a lot of attention, I'm going to the border of Seekonk and Rehoboth, and I'm making myself known there, right? And it's a funny idea to think of, because you're like, don't be silly. Ghosts can't be jealous. Like, a ghost can't. Well, this dude, thought his camera was jealous, right? I mean, I think
I like that you call Dave this dude.
This dude. I like that. My name's on the screen and everything. You just go with this dude.
I didn't have it up. I wasn't paying attention. I get in trouble all the time because I call everyone nicknames and stuff, and every guy, every male student's brother and every female student's sister. Like, what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying, brother? Like, so. But I think that idea is kind of real. But then the other side is true. So I was working with this woman named Jackie Barrett, who is the scariest psychic you've ever met. Her nickname. And I recently was talking to someone, and they went, "You mean the White Serpent?" And I'm like, "Oh, wow. Like, she's actually more well-known than I thought." If your nickname is the White Serpent, that you're not necessarily always on the side of good. And she was doing an this man had brought her in to psychically cleanse him and figure out what was going on. And he said that there was a monster, a demon in the basement, right? And so she went down to perform her own kind of exorcism, her own kind of cleansing in the basement. And she kind of came face to face with what was down there. And she also came face to face with this little boy. And she had an entire conversation with this little boy. He didn't remember where he was from, but he had been known he was down there a long time. The monster scares him all the time, blah, blah, blah. She comes upstairs to kind of talk to the guy and see what's going, kind of giving him a briefing of what she's discovered so far and what she's going to do to cleanse the house. And she looks and she sees a picture of the little boy on the wall. And it's the man who owns the house. So this house had been his family for a few generations. And he had blocked out that when he was a kid, he used to be locked in the basement, right? And his parents, in an abusive punishment kind of way, wouldn't let him out. And so he would sometimes spend days locked in the darkness of this basement. And he started to remember that he made a playmate for himself, right? And so what this kid had actually done was he created a ghost, a spirit form of himself that became his companion down in that basement and attracted something that was sucking on the energy, which then separated the two of them. And for 10, 15, 20 years had kept this ghost kid alive to feed off of it. Now, if you hear that story, it sounds like the plot of an episode of Evil, except for I trust this woman so explicitly, I don't think that she's going to lie to me. There's a lot to unpack about that story. This kid basically split himself, kind of a spiritual version of multiple personalities. And there was a kid version of himself that had been formed in a tulpa type situation down in that basement with a secondary monster feeding off of his energy. It kind of it's that other half of, do we create some of this stuff or do we just draw other people to it? So if I take both of those things together, my answer is like, it could be either one of those, It could be, that's what we're observing is what we create, and then also what we've made famous enough so that other spirits find their way there to kind of tap into the fame, to get into the selfie kind of.
I can't, I have no doubts that there are spirits out there that keep that pettiness and vanity to where they would absolutely, manifest themselves in a red flannel and show themselves as a red beard and wait for somebody to stop and, honk their horn, like, oh, it's showtime.
Yeah.
And going at, and go and become the character that is the hitchhiker.
That's so interesting because I'm thinking it from the opposite. I'm like, how sad and pathetic, not vanity or like, arrogance, but this kind of like, no one talks to me, so I have to go where the other cool ghosts are. And I see it almost as like a sad and pathetic thing, but I guess, potato.
I can see your way, but yeah, I just get the whole, like, ghost influencer.
Yeah.
That type thing.
I mean, and it's oftentimes, because keep in mind, when you go to a famously haunted location, something happens, right? And then what you do is you take your personal experience and you put it up next to what other people have said and you connect the two, right? So a great example, we went to Stetson University here in DeLand, Florida. And one of the paranormal things we were looking into was a couple who are buried in this tower called Hully Tower. This couple walk the yard in front of Hully Tower with sometimes with the dog, sometimes with not, in like the early morning, right? And so we went there looking to see if we could catch them walking the dog. What we caught instead was where that lawn that's in front of Hully Tower ends, because it's kind of the center of the campus of Stetson. There are administration buildings and classrooms and all these things. And we sat there for probably 10 minutes and watched these figures walking across the campus, almost as if we were watching a whole bunch of people go to class. And we have the video up on our website and stuff like that. And it was, they were walking, they weren't quite people, right? They had kind of like a figure of like a person. It was almost like a snapshot. in that they were just like negatives. You know what I'm saying? Like back in the day, like film, like the negative of a film. The atmosphere of the area totally changed. And we were just standing there watching this, and they would appear in one place, disappear, then go to another place, go in between we'd lose them in between the trees that were there. And we watched these figures walking across this area. Now, first, our assumption was they were students because it was a campus. Well, they could have been anything, right? But the other thing was we were like, I wonder if we just saw the Hollies, right? We were there to look at the Hollies to see this couple that was in this area. And we had to fight the temptation to think that what we had witnessed was the thing that we had gone out there to see. And rather just take the phenomenon at what it was, which was some kind of energy was moving across campus, and we were sitting there watching it. And so I think a lot of times, if you are in that redheaded hitchhiker situation, you're not seeing the redheaded hitchhiker, you're seeing ghost lights crossing the street, and you're saying, that's got to be the redheaded hitchhiker. And because even though that's not necessarily what the story of the urban legend is, it's paranormal and it's in a place where something is happening. Here's the story of what happens in that place. That must be what we just witnessed. So they don't necessarily have to put on the red flannel, although that'd be really cool if ghosts could like do change outs.
I can't imagine that they can. It's just energy.
Yeah, well, all the time I see that whole meme of like, be careful what you wear today, because if you die, that's your outfit in the afterlife.
Well, I mean, if it's a meme, then it must be true.
But it makes me consciously think of what I'm wearing all of the time, making sure that I want to wear the right death gear.
You should just wear a 3-piece suit every day.
No.
It's really funny because, I'm a jeans and t-shirt kind of guy.
So that's what you'd like to be buried in?
Right, please. You know what I'm saying? And my goal is like, let me get the coolest t-shirt or a t-shirt. People go like, what is that? Why is he wearing this spring break? And I have to explain to people, dude, it's not a real spring break. It's a joke on the Creature from the Black Lagoon, which is shot in the Ocala. I have a book about ghosts of the Ocala. You're like, I have to explain the whole thing. But it's funny because every day, when I go to work, I teach in a shirt and tie. Every day, except for Fridays, which are dress down days. And yet, every single day that I wear a shirt and tie, some adult, not the kids, some adult says, look at you all dressed up. Literally every single day I wear a shirt and tie. I just come off with an attitude that I'm a jeans and t-shirt kind of person. So,
well, either that or your coworkers are just not creative.
Or observant, or really care about me.
Really not observant. Yeah.
Or really care about you as a person.
I would make a joke that they're teaching your kids and not mine, except for they actually are teaching my kids. So,
are you the new substitute? Have you been here before? Wait till you get that question next. Yeah.
Oh, look! I can't tell you how many people open house. I had to wear a polo shirt. And I hate wearing polo shirts. Literally, I wear a polo shirt one day a year, and that's open house at school. The number of people that said to me, oh, look at you, you cleaned up well. And I'm like, I literally wear a shirt and tie every single day. Every single day.
And I've dropped down to a polo, and I'm getting compliments.
Right.
I don't know if you should take that as a compliment. Yeah, again.
Right.
That's a nice pat on the back. Yeah.
Whatever.
Well,
so.
I guess speaking then of horrible coworkers and just a horrible educational system in general, because that was another thing that I wanted to talk to you about.
Yeah.
And that was, it was a post that I saw. It was for the evil one, but I was shocked. I was just like, you got to be shitting me. Just because of the whole system. And that is,
you're shocked. By the way, you're going to be shocked at the wrong thing with this.
I probably will. I'm just shocked about the whole thing. So maybe like one little section. Plus, it's Florida, so I guess I don't get particularly. I can't get particularly too shocked. But you had posted that your books, your paranormal books, which talk about stories and legends, and had been deemed "quote unquote" safe. For your students to read.
Yes,
I want that entire story because that.
Okay, so So this is, I'm going to make it paranormal. I'm going to make sure that like I touch upon that stuff, but it's really political. And Florida is horrible.
Yeah.
Let's just like start out with that. And so there's this idea, which is not a Florida thing, but that books are being used to brainwash kids one way or the other. And so it's really important that regardless of where you stand politically, this is a belief that's held by the left and the right. It's just the right that are doing something about it, right? And so here in Florida, about a year and a half ago, they came up with they passed a new law that said that every book in every classroom in Florida has to be scanned into a system, approved, and searchable, right? So anyone right now in the world can search my library of the books that are in my room and to complain about them, to make sure that they're okay, right? Meaning you right now from Minnesota can say that you don't think that Flubber is an appropriate book, or that here's what I get all the time, that The Outsiders promotes gangs, right? You can make a complaint about that and potentially get me in trouble and get the book off the shelf, right? So it's searchable by people who are not my students' parents. A guy actually lost his job last year. I shouldn't say that. A guy was challenged in my school and quit in disgust because he had books. What teachers do in Florida then is they just don't have books, right? It's such a hassle that I literally have more books on shelves in my classroom than there are books in the entire rest of the school combined. Because I'm like, I am not folding to this. I am going to fight to get books approved in my room, right? I'm a reading teacher. I'm an English teacher. Like, kids will read in my classroom. And so you literally have to go womp womp, and you have to scan the book and put it aside, and you have to wait for it to get approval. And the only way it gets approval is if someone in the county, although I think it's also the state, so I think that there's an issue with the way my principal presented it a few days ago. Someone in the state of Florida, some librarian had to have read that book, gone through the process, and approved it to get that book on the shelf. Okay. Otherwise, it's not going on. So at some point last year, at the beginning, like this time last year, I had 700 books that were in my room, like 20 of which were approved. Now, here's what they do, right? It's the genius of our political system. Figuring that if you put a book up, someone is going to complain about it. They just don't review the books. So it's not as if you're banning the books. We just haven't gotten to that book yet. Do you get what I'm saying? So It's not as if you can't complain that they're banning books. They're just not approving them. So there must have been some kind of huge push, because when I came back for this school year, yes, in Florida, my first day with students is tomorrow. We've already had our 2 weeks of training and everything. All of my books were approved, which means some media specialist in Florida deemed Picture Yourself Capturing Ghosts on Film to be a book worthy over something like, I don't know, To Kill a Mockingbird and Mark Twain, Tom Sawyer, I should say Huckleberry Finn, and like Their Eyes Were Watching God and The Color Purple, all of which are not approved and not allowed to be in classroom libraries. And it's just really, it blew me away, because I'm like, I kind of wanted to not be approved. I kind of wanted to have this air of like, I'm so bad. Like, go through the whole process and like put a big stamp and say like, not only is he a bad writer, but he's a danger to children. So last year, I get in trouble a lot at school because I bring this stuff, what I do, into the classroom. And I always present it as I'm a storyteller. So you can agree that ghosts are real, not agree ghosts are real. Like, I am presenting these as stories, and we're going to pull what do these stories say about the living as opposed to the dead, right? And how can we learn about an area or a time in history from the ghost stories that come from it, right? I'm a teacher. Like, that's what I do. And I do this, by the way, I do the same thing in my books. I do the same thing in the ghost story. I do the same thing in my presentations. And so we were coming off reading the Odyssey, which the kids liked because it was, people killing each other and having sex and stuff. I teach freshmen, by the way, so it's not like I'm in third grade and like we're doing this stuff. And so I decided, you know what I'm going to do? Like, we have to cover narrative poetry. We have 3 days before spring break. Let me do something fun and something that I know, having a daughter, was kind of trending at that time on TikTok, which was, let's analyze The Devil Went Down to Georgia. I almost got fired. I had so many complaints about introducing the concept of the devil. First of all, going off the curriculum because it's not in our book, but then introducing this idea of the devil. And I'm like, dude, the good guy wins, right? And it's funny because I brought into the discussion movies like Crossroads, if you remember Crossroads with Ralph Macchio and Steve Vai.
No, not the Britney Spears one?
Not the Britney Spears one,
okay.
no. This is slightly better than that. And this whole tradition of the innocent person who gets put face to face with the devil, and then the devil loses because the person remembers their roots and remembers where they come from, the innocence of it. And that is a theme that is constant in this narrative poetry. And I got challenged by some parents who had a real big issue with me bringing that to class. And then I had to have a meeting with administration and these parents. And, there's the side of me who's like, dude, could you just shut up and just let me? Because I had said at some point, the rhetorical question, what would you sell your soul to the devil for? Right? Which was immediately followed up by, after a dramatic pause, in all of these stories, the person thinks that they want something, and eventually they come to realize that their life is better without it. I have low-level students, right? Like I'm starting tomorrow, and I get notifications that I have to know that I have felons in my room. I got 7 felons in my room, right? I literally had a student last year who's in jail right now for killing somebody, right? At 15. Yeah, that is something that they picked up on, that dramatic pause. Now, in the defense, the mom in this meeting was bawling her eyes out, saying, can't you see how there's an attack on our children? It was a genuine, you can't just laugh it off. Like, this woman had but then the husband was from Massachusetts. And I'm like, brother, I know you read The Devil and Tom Walker when you were in Massachusetts. I know you read Young Goodman Brown. Like, these are classic literature things that are taught in New England. I don't know if you guys ever were forced to read those in high school, but every school kid in New England has read The Devil and Tom Walker, which became the movie The Devil and Daniel Webster, right? Old Scratch. Going to court to figure. Dude, John Lovitz did a parody of it on Saturday Night Live. You're like, it's a famous story. I'm just like, asshole. Like, why are you challenging me on this? Like, can't you? Like, you had the same education that I did. You're 3 years younger than me. I know that you had this. And so those paranormal, those supernatural ideas are in conflict with a lot of the religious ideas of people down here in the South who can't compartmentalize what these stories are and what they do. They just see it as an affront, as if the two things can't exist in the same space.
So are these the same people that are going to church and throwing rattlesnakes on each other to see whether or not, God saves them, whether they're worthy to get bit and not die of a rattlesnake bite?
Yeah, there are quite a few of those denominations here in Southwest Florida, specifically in Lee County. These were not those. But they were definitely they were definitely Christians who thought that this stuff was an attack, and it's we wonder why our kids lose critical thinking ability. And I don't think that I got in trouble again earlier in the year, like only a few weeks before, because I said something along the lines of these myths are the foundation of all religions. So all religions have stories which help people to understand the ideals of that religion and what they're built on, right? And someone went home and said, Mr. Balzano said, the stories about Jesus are just stories. I got to the point last year where I would go the long way to my classroom so I would avoid all administrators so no one would talk to me. That's how often I got in trouble last year for this stuff.
That's probably why they said you clean up nice, because they don't see you anymore.
They don't see me, right? Exactly. They see me sweaty from going the long way around in the floor.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So it was cool to see that my books were approved and my books can be on the shelf and my students can, because it was a dirty little secret that they have a published author teaching them about literature. I should be the prized pony. I've written more books than the majority of the staff have read. We have a high level of education, and then a really severe drop off. So it's some people I haven't read a book. Teachers, I haven't read a book since I was in college or whatever, and I'm like, really? So it's a privilege to have it up there. My goal now is to use school funds to buy a whole bunch of my books.
Nice. There you go.
That's my goal. So I'm just gonna. What I think I'm going to do is I'm gonna buy, because every year we get a certain amount of money we can go spend on materials. I think I'm just gonna buy 30 copies of Haunted Objects, and put half of them on the shelf and then sell the other half.
There you go.
Yeah.
Why don't you use some of that money to buy a haunted object
for the classroom?
Sure.
Yeah. So, so I every year, and I delayed it. I usually do it around Halloween time, but I was already in trouble by then, and so as the lead in to doing the Odyssey, I had them create their own urban legends, and they had to research modern legends as well. So they were coming in talking about Slender Man and Momo Challenge and all these great ones. And I love how oftentimes they go can I do Santa Claus? I'm like, whatever, I don't care. Are you doing something? Was not the intent, but I have to have that. I let them do whatever they wanted. Didn't say it had to be scary. And kids wanted to bring in Ouija boards. And they wanted to bring in divining rods, and they wanted to play Charlie in the classroom.
Jesus.
And so that's where I have to draw the line, things on that. So bringing an actual haunted object into the classroom. So years ago, right, when I was, when I didn't have to worry about feeding my children, I used to do a whole lesson on how to be observant, how to interview people, how to be observant, how to tell subtle things. And what I used to do was I would get everyone in the class in a circle, and then I would cold read them, and I would let them have conversations with dead relatives. And I would go throughout the whole thing. I'm seeing someone with a J. Maybe is it Jason or something? He's touching his head. Did you have an uncle? Yes, my uncle. And I would cold read them. And then I would tell them my process of having done that and the things that they gave. If I tried to do that today, I think I would be tarred and feathered and probably hung as a witch.
Absolutely,
you would be hung as a witch. You'd be burned as a witch.
But it was a very powerful lesson in how to be observant and how to pull out, evidence and things like. No, I can't do anything fun anymore.
So they have college courses now. I mean, not every college, but every once in a while you'll find a college that will actually have like a course on like paranormal studies or metaphysics, that sort of thing, something that goes beyond, spiritual religion and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, do you think that there will ever be a time when the paranormal in any sort of facet, whether it be UFOs, whether it be metaphysical, whether it be supernatural, will actually play a role in the education of children? Like the other side would be something that children need to learn.
Not in Florida, for sure.
Well, that just mean in general, but Florida would be state number, 500.
Right. It's an interesting question. I think that it's hilarious that we teach them all of this stuff, and we teach a strong belief in the supernatural and the majesty of the forces of nature. We literally teach them about Paul Bunyan, right? I mean, is Paul Bunyan not a demon, right? Like the dude could take down a whole forest in one fell swoop, right?
He was right. A giant. I mean, it shouldn't exist.
Right. We have Pecos Bill, who's manipulating the weather and riding it like it's a crazy horse. Like we have John Henry, who is wielding this supernatural strength, right? Like we have in textbooks, they've brought in, thank heavens, they've brought in ideas like Superman, Batman, Spider-Man as literature, right? Like they've used that kind of thing. Every kid is taught, and there's no one, and I teach it for an entire month leading into Christmas, A Christmas Carol, right? Which is a supernatural story, right? And I avoid overly talking about it, and I talk more about the ideas of past, present, and future. Like it's hilarious to me that so much of that kind of thing has been, the supernatural forces have been replaced by ideas of psychology and sociology. So we've taken the ghost out of the ghost story and we've made it entirely about sociology and psychology and the subconscious and things like that, which to me is no less supernatural than the demons, right? Like the idea that you're three people inside of yourself and your mind, and that can be manipulated, and sometimes that can be used intent to do things. That is supernatural. So it's really, I would be interested to see where it goes. I'd also be really interested to know if there's going to be a huge pushback against it, whether there's going to be a point where kids lack wonder and they lack awe, and they push back and they seek out those stories and they seek out the supernatural and the paranormal to the point where it becomes commonplace for it to be back in what they're reading in class. Because at some point, if you're just eating candy and getting sick to your stomach, you're going to want to go eat a vegetable, no matter how much you hate vegetables. And so I feel that we're going to reach a point at some place, probably after I've retired, which hopefully will be tomorrow, that kids will bring that stuff out. And I think probably the closest we have to that, like in modern times, would be the fighting to get Harry Potter to be able to be read in classrooms. And the fight to have, I've been teaching a long time. So the idea of, which by the way, all three of the Twilight books are approved, by the way, which is hilarious to me. You're not going to approve Super Fudge by Judy Blume, but you're going to approve New Moon, where the dude basically falls in love with a kid or whatever that thing is, imprints on a kid or whatever, right? So I think that those things do pop up, and I think that they demand, when they're good, they demand to be acknowledged in the classroom. It's just that there's a lot of really crappy stuff out there, and so I think it has to be one of those things where it's driven by really great thinking minds. And so you can't necessarily have your average Joe who goes out and ghost hunts cram his way into a classroom. It's got to be thinkers who understand like what this stuff is about and how much it has to do with history, that you're gonna like kind of creep in and destroy their foundation until it's accepted. But I don't think you're ever gonna have like ghosts are real in a elementary school, middle school, high school curriculum type thing. I don't think that'll happen, but the stories will find their way in.
I was going to say, I think it would be possibly taught in a private school or a private school setting long before it would ever breach out into the public school system, irregardless of the state,
Yeah, it's crazy to think that 15, 16 years ago, before I came to Florida, I was teaching a paranormal investigating class in a Catholic school because they thought it was a really cool idea. And I'm not even talking folklore. I'm talking literally, we were going around like the old churches in the area with equipment, investigating like reports of there being like the ghost of a nun in this little place. And the teachers and the administration and the nuns who are in our school were like, this is awesome. The kids love it. Go look at ghosts. So I totally agree with that idea of it being like something that private schools are doing.
Yeah.
Sounds like I honestly, I have to say that I would go back to school if one of the classes were like, hey, we're going to go out and do investigations and for field trips and stuff. Like, I agree. I think that would be amazing.
So someone was on my ghost tour like a few weeks ago, and there were these 5 like really giggly college girls who actually ended up being very important. But they one of them said, and I'm trying to remember the school, but it was in the South. It wasn't one of the Florida schools, I don't think. And she said they have a whole degree there on ghosts and the supernatural. And I was like, oh, do you mean like parapsychology? Because Duke, you can get a degree in parapsychology. Yes. Riviera College in New Hampshire, you can get a degree in parapsychology. So there are those courses out there. And she was like, no, parapsychology is part of it. But we literally, as class assignments, took field trips to haunted locations and used the equipment and stuff like that. Like, we didn't get certified as ghost techs, but it was the idea and the concept of it was part of my college. So I think it does happen in colleges. And definitely what I do, which is look at the ghostly legends, is in most college campuses in this country that are not Florida.
But not Florida.
But not Florida. Yeah, I mean, when we were doing ghostly legends in North Carolina, because we took a road trip to get to Indiana, and we were going to stop in North Carolina for like 3 days. And so I contacted the professor, a doctor, about a class she was teaching that was called like Slender Man and Beyond. So we were talking earlier before we came on the air about like whether I ever do interviews on my show. That was someone, Andrea Kidda was her name, Dr. Andrea Kidda. We have a whole interview about how like how academics, because a lot of folklorists are pissed at the fact that I call myself a folklorist. And traditionally, academic folklorists don't acknowledge the paranormal. And she did, right? Like, she totally sees like, this is where the needle is, where it's going. And so we have a great conversation up in the archives where we look at that kind of stuff. So, and she talked about the pushback that she initially got, not from students and not from parents, but from academics who were like, this is not worthy of being taught. Like, how dare you think that you should do an examination of the movie The Texas Chainsaw Massacre as delving into what America fears and not just maybe evaluate it on its aesthetic movie quality.
Aesthetic movie quality. The psychotic giant man firing up a chainsaw, sawing innocent half-naked girls in half.
Okay,
the psychology behind it.
but the film student in me think that that's a pivotal movie in the history of film.
Agreed.
You know, and so rather than looking at it as its quality of like a film that needed to be made and changed how movies were made, let's talk about the supernatural aspects of it. You know, it was kind of what I was getting at. So
that movie, to give it its props, was creepy as hell. Like when I first saw it, if I would have been traveling through some flat ass part of Texas and like come upon this house that looked anything remotely like their house, and I had seen that movie first, I would have just kept right on going. I would not have stopped.
Yeah.
Right? It impacted me that much. Not that I thought I was going to get killed by a guy, some wild psycho in a, sewn human flesh mask with a chainsaw, but just in the back of my mind, I'd be like, I need to be careful here. Like, something's wrong. Even though it wouldn't have been, probably. It would have probably been some little old grandma and grandpa that have been like, oh, honey, come on in and have cookies and tea and meet my son. He's in the basement.
By the way, great.
By the way,
let's make some chili.
Why do you have all these freezers? Yeah, I don't understand why you have so many freezers.
So I don't know if either of you guys have watched that new documentary about the Brat Pack. It's really good. It's really good. It's like Andrew McCarthy going back and tracking the history of the Brat Pack and its impact on all the people who were counted as people from the Brat Pack, but then going out and interviewing like Emilio Estevez and Ali Sheedy and different people as to how this changed their lives. And it's a really great documentary. And one of the primary things that they talk about, especially at the beginning, is the idea that like this was where movies were going, right? Is that movies went from being things about adults to things about teenagers and people in their early 20s. And that they were stopping making these movies with like Cary Grant as like a 60-year-old, like chasing after a 50-year-old woman. And they were making these movies that kids could relate to because they were now having money and they were hanging out at the mall anyway. So get them into the movie theater. That happened in horror 30 years before that or 20 years before that. When you have things like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you have Halloween, horror movies were on the idea that you could scare the crap out of teenagers and that you could use the ghostly legends and the urban legends, the babysitter, who the serial killer is upstairs, the phone calls, the roommate who is being raped and murdered and someone's leaving a message in blood on the wall, the people who go out to the cabin in the woods to all, have sex and do drugs and break all of those taboos that they're not supposed to be doing are all going to be massacred by somebody. Horror movies was able to tap into that youth idea and show youth being the main characters of movies long before major Hollywood. So we need to give those kind of movies their props, man. Like they are really the forerunners of those kinds of movies. You wouldn't have St. Elmo's Fire if you didn't have Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Right. Said it.
There he said it.
You wouldn't have American Pie if it hadn't been for Halloween.
God, I hope we might. Well, either way, but I guess you could say then because Halloween, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Those are always slaughter horror movies.
Yeah.
Then you had Dave and I have mentioned it many times on the show is the Blair Witch Project. That brought the supernatural and creep, no murder really, but the creep factor was through the roof.
Yeah.
So,
but that brought the supernatural.
Have we never talked about the Blair Witch Project?
We have never talked about the Blair Witch Project, Chris.
So I am so ridiculously obsessed with that movie that it's unhealthy. So I had heard about that movie probably 6 or 7, maybe 8 months before it was ever released in the theaters. And being like I was just saying, my background is film, right? So being in film school originally before I became a writer, I was always like, who's at Cannes, who's at Sundance, like who are the people who are making the scene at these events, right? And so a friend of mine had said, there's this movie called The Blair Witch Project which we just won the Cannes Film Festival, and it is crazy, and told me the plot of it, right? And so I was already obsessed with the movie. Then what happens is they win Movie of the Year, right? And they go out and they shop the movie, right, to the major markets, because they were honestly, and there's a bigger story here. They were just some kids out of UCF here in Florida, right? And so my friend, because I'm now graduated, my friend was working at a Hollywood studio, and he got a copy of a copy of a copy of something that was sent to the studio so that the studio would buy it, would buy the movie and distribute it, right? Eventually goes to Artisan and changes movie history. So I had a copy of the Blair Witch Project that is a full 2 hours long, right? And is better than what you saw in the theater. And no one had ever heard of it. So all that summer, before the hype started, the spring into the summer, I would get my friends together and I would show them this movie and I would tell them it was real. And it would scare the crap. So anyone who's like, Blair Witch isn't scary at all, scare the crap out of them. My dad, who spends the spring and summer sleeping on the back porch in a cot because he loves being outside, didn't do it that year after I showed him the movie. Right? Crazy. So details of that movie are they're just like, I know parts of that movie and I know ideas about that movie as well as I know some of my family members. So a few years ago, I'm doing research on the Swamp Witch. And this is like a major book that I've been working on for years. And I haven't gotten it right yet. And I'm going to do it right. And I'm going to independently publish it because no one will publish this book. And there is this Swamp Witch in this town that no longer exists called Pemberton Ferry, which is probably like an hour north of Tampa, right? If people who are in Florida are into ghosts or in Florida, this Pemberton Ferry is the sister city of Brooksville. If you're into ghosts and you're in Florida, you know Brooksville. And actually, some people mistakenly say it happens in Brooksville. So there's this story of a swamp witch who acts exactly like the Blair Witch, right? Like the background story is slightly different, but what she does at this campsite is exactly the same, ripping on the tent, slamming on the doors, things like that. So there's this guy in Florida who does what I do named Mark Muncy, who we discussed off air for a few minutes. He tells me, you know that the Swamp Witch is the basis for the Blair Witch Project. And I'm like, no, it isn't. Like, I know exactly the steps that they took when they made that. And he's like, no, listen. There's this guy who wrote Weird Florida whose name is Charlie Carlson. And he spoke at the campus of the University of Central Florida, where the director and the producer were students at the time. And they were so mesmerized by this that they decided to write the Blair Witch Project. And I'm like, okay, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I did research. I cannot find that Charlie Carlson ever spoke at the University of Central Florida, although I'm sure he did. I know specifically the cases and the stories that were the main inspiration for the story itself, for the Blair Witch Project. Not to mention the fact, right, that if Charlie Carlson was writing about this legend in 19 whatever, why is it not in his book? Right? Like if you are an expert in a legend that was the inspiration for one of the most successful modern horror movies in 2005 when you wrote your book, why would you not talk about it? I'm like, this isn't right, but I don't want to offend my friend, right? Because he said he's seen the research. He said he talked to producers, blah, blah, blah. So a few years ago, I'm doing an event right down the street from where I live now. And they're viewing out in the park. It's Halloween. They're viewing out in the park the Blair Witch Project. And Dan Merrick, the guy who wrote and directed it, is hosting. and then he's going to have a question and answer afterwards. And so I'm there as a vendor, right? I'm selling my books, blah, blah, blah. And a woman comes up to me who works for the local radio station. And she's like, oh, so what are you doing? And I tell her everything I just told you. And I said, and I want to talk to him. The question I want to ask him is that true? And then I show her the videotape that I still have, which is about 10 feet away over there, of that videotape of the Blair Witch Project from 1998, a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. She comes back 10 minutes later. Dan wants to meet you. He said that he hasn't seen the version of the Blair Witch Project you have in 20 years. Bring the tape with you. And so there I am sitting, eating bad pizza and drinking beer with the director of the Blair Witch Project, asking him, and he's like, what are you talking? He's like, I don't even know who Charlie Carlson is. Like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I never went to. And so it not only, which is weird because if you remember the Blair Witch Project as part of the propaganda, they had that documentary. Mm-hmm. Charlie Carlson is in there as a folklorist. He's like, we were literally just pulling people on the campus of UCF to like be in that documentary. Like, we had no idea he actually was a folklorist. So now I have proof. I've had dinner and drinks with the director of the Blair Witch Project. And on top of that, he borrowed my copy of the Blair Witch Project so that he could tape it. So he could actually digitize the version that I had because it hasn't existed in like 20 years. So.
Well, you know what you're going to do next with that copy?
Send it to you?
Yes.
Digitize it and send it to us. I'd love to see the original, like the 2-hour version. It's
really cool because some of the things that are in there that help to explain what's going on are not in there. So the whole interview that's like, and I heard that like he used to put like one person in the room and make them face the wall when he was killing someone else. That explanation isn't in there. You just get it because you're watching it. You know what I'm saying? And so there are a few things like that. And the cool thing is that because it's been taped so many times, the sound drops out at certain times. It'll go like it'll get all foggy and stuff like that. So you actually feel as if you're watching. It's kind of like digital
raw footage.
Right. Like it really feels as if you're watching like analog horror,
like reel to reel almost.
Analog horror was a thing, right? And it's not because they made it that way. It's just because the tape is so old and damaged that it actually adds to the aesthetic quality. So I'll try to get you guys copies of it.
Well, you definitely, before it actually gets too damaged and old to actually watch, you need to, have it digitized, or at least have a digitized version sent to you.
Yeah, I mean, I have a whole section when I do events that has like it's all about that swamp witch because, like I said, it's really an obsession of mine. And that tape is like right there, and people walk up and go, "Why do you have a copy of the Blair Witch Project?" And then I've got to tell them how it's kind of like proving a negative. Like I have to show them how like there's an urban legend out there that this Florida haunting was the inspiration for the Blair Witch Project, which is not true.
So was the Blair Witch Project then in any way, shape, or form related to the Bell Witch?
Yeah, so it is, which they'll both admit too that it was more of the idea of something creepy out in the woods, supernatural, being a witch, because there are really no elements of the Bell Witch that are like the Blair Witch Project.
Correct. Right.
So it was more of this woman. Right.
Yeah.
It was a combination of the Bell Witch and this woman named Mary Dwyer, in Maryland, where the other guy was from. Yeah. That were the primary inspirations. And then Blair was the name of a friend of his. And he thought, what a generic term. Because the whole idea, which is what makes the Blair Witch Project so effective, and I think if people go back and watch it without the expectation of the hype that was into it, they'll enjoy it more now, was this idea of these woods could be your woods. This legend could be happening in your town. Like, isn't this just like something that you've heard of in an area that you're near? This is what happened when these kids looked into it. So it was intentionally designed to be, they thought Blair was a generic enough term that everyone would know, like a Blair High School or something like that. And so they could apply it to the town or the county that they were in anywhere in the United States.
And those woods weren't really that creepy. They were wide open. I mean, it really was not creepy. I mean, those are my deer hunting woods, right? I mean, it's not, there's nothing really creepy to me about that at all. But so here's a question. So with this swamp witch thing, then what do you put the similarities to with her, with the legend of her, kind of clawing at the tents and doing stuff like that? You think that that's just kind of a common thing that would happen with an entity like that? Or do you think there's any type of correlation between, let's say, the Bell Witch and the Swamp Witch and maybe some other witch stories? Like, are they interlaced somehow and maybe in a dimensional type of way, or in a way we don't understand?
So spoilers, the ghost is not that of a witch.
Okay.
But if you go to where this is happening, so while the town no longer exists, people can find it on a map if they look for Hog Island, Florida. I think that that's very common activity for most ghosts, right? Like, think about that knocking on the door, scratching at the wall, dark figures seen. And it happens in this case, just happens to be in a swampy area. Now, the very first time we legend trip this, it's one of those things where oftentimes the legend trip helps you to understand the context of, like, oh, so this is why they're making up this story. At that location, first of all, there is a death. There is a tragedy that happens there. It just has nothing to do with a witch. It's just an easier story to make it a witch. But right next to the location where this is seen, there is an almost perfect round swamp, like a lagoon, you might say, right? And it is, first of all, it's geographically crazy because it's almost a perfect circle. And all around that circle, there are ghost trees, right? Or fairy trees. So it's almost like a fairy ring. And so by that, I mean trees that have the base of them is dug out. So it's like clear cut. So you can like reach into the bark and the first layer is gone. And so in folklore, that's where that's like where the fae can come into this world. So they come to and from, and as an extension, the dead can come from graves from the other side. They can enter this world and exit this world through these fairy ring trees. So through these fairy trees, these trees that essentially most of the time that happens is there's some kind of disease that kills the base of the tree. So the tree continues to exist, but it has like a scar. And that scar is a big hole in the bottom of the tree. At this little circle, it's surrounded by those, right? So it looks creepy as hell. And then in addition to that, it has this algae which glows green. So if this weird stuff is happening in the woods, right? And you are seeing this dark figure walking along, and you then take a few steps, and by a few steps, I mean like less than 50 yards away from where the primary haunting location is, there is this very witchy looking scene of these circles and these trees, which are also known as witch trees, and it glows green because of the algae. You're going to associate it with witches. And so you're going to associate it with something supernatural as opposed to paranormal, right? And it makes sense that whoever is in that little area, in that little swamp area, is a witch because the environment is witchy. And by the way, when people see the hanging body, there's only two kind of things that get hung for committing crimes. And guess what? They're not going to admit the first one. So it's a lot easier, even though I've got news articles that tell me that that's what it is. So they're going to take the second one, which is the witch story.
Yes, they are. I just want to say two things about the Blair Witch Project. and we can go on. First one is I just bought it on Blu-ray while we were talking. Yes, I don't have it yet. The second thing is it's
You could have gone down to the Goodwill and bought me a VCR, and I could have taped it for you for like half the price that you just bought that Blu-ray for.
I still want the 2-hour version.
Okay.
But until I get it, I'll have to deal with that.
I got you.
I have
So-
my VHS copy that I bought brand new right when it was released.
Did you ever play the really bad video games, like the PC video games? They were crazy bad. Like when I tell you I was obsessed with the Blair Witch Project, it's not like a I wicked like I was. I mean, I had the things hanging from my walls and stuff like that, the symbol and everything. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead. Number 2.
So the second thing is it's weird, very very weird to have watched that movie and enjoyed it, and then like a couple of years later to see Heather Donahue, or that her last name Donahue,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
the lead actress of that movie, playing opposite Freddie Prinze Jr. in a rom-com.
What's that? What movie is that? When was the last time Freddie Prinze Jr. made a movie? I'm sorry, that's why I'm thrown off.
Well, a long time. It's a
1985.
It's a little bit longer than that. But it's a movie called Boys and Girls. It's Freddie Prinze Jr. and Claire Forlani.
That's funny.
And there's like this awkward college student wearing a wig, a blonde wig or whatever, and it's Heather Donahue.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
And she's trying to hit on Freddie Prinze Jr. and everything. And I'm just like, I can't watch
gonna
her.
be pissed.
Say what?
Buffy's gonna be pissed.
Yeah, pretty much.
Because that's
You
your
never
husband.
saw Close Encounters of the Third Kind, but you saw this movie.
I own this movie and I can recite it by heart, Dave.
That's funny because
your movie choices never cease to amaze me.
Sometimes I'll be watching an SVU. I can't. This is the third reference I've made to Law and Order SVU.
SVU, yeah, that's okay.
It's
a good show.
And the other guy will come on.
The guy that played Lunk,
not Josh, but the other guy.
The guy that played Lunk or whatever. No, not maybe it was John. Lunk, I think, was the Bear Wench Project.
Yeah, I think you're in a different movie. But every once in a while, like that episode will come on of him and SVU when they were trying to make it, and it's really cool because there have been a lot of recent articles because this is the 25th anniversary, and so it's kind of like all of those people, all those actors talk about how much this ruined their lives and their acting career, because they were beyond typecast, right? Like. They had to literally go out there and promote the movie as if they were dead. So,
true.
It's crazy though, because the best horror movies, let me rephrase that. The best horror media that's been produced in the last 10 years, we'll say, is homage to the Blair Witch Project. It is this analog horror stuff. If you guys haven't watched things like the Mandela Catalog or the the Walton Files, these things are genuinely creepy as hell, much more than you're getting from Hollywood movies. My daughter and I are currently writing our own analog horror about a teacher who is essentially teaching. We haven't quite figured out whether it's going to be an urban legend class or whether it's going to be something that's seemingly not connected. And through a series of Zoom meetings and personal logs that these kids have to make, he is essentially making them all run through challenges like the Momo Challenge, like the like Blue Whale. But instead of suicide at the end of this, they sell their soul to the devil. And in today's day and age, a 15-year-old can make that movie and can make it much better than most of the movies that are out there. And that's, I think, kind of like what horror movies have lost. Have you guys ever watched the show From? I've just started watching this show From. And so it's from Jack Bender, and one of the other guys from Lost, who made Lost, and Harold Perriman, who played the Michael, is the star of it. And the concept is there's this town that once you enter, you can't leave.
Oh,
and so
yeah.
it's
Well, they come in on the bus.
Yeah. The second season.
I've seen. Yes, I have seen that. Interesting. That's a very interesting concept.
And it is the scariest thing.
Yeah.
That I have watched on television, maybe ever. Like genuinely, like this is really scary stuff. Like it's kind of like lost, and then something really horror movie will happen.
Yeah.
And it's almost no special effects. And it's this idea, I think, that like if we think of our greatest horror movies and we were to line them up, they're going to be cheaply made ones. And they're not the ones that are like over the top. Even like something like Get Out does have like the whole effect of like, the low place or whatever it is. But that's shot by cameras. That's not even like really, really special effects. I think that's what horror is, because it taps into our fears, and our fears are right there on the surface, man. You don't need CGI to get to them.
I never saw that as a horror movie, and I still don't. And I've watched it a couple times. Yeah. I just don't see how that classifies as a horror movie.
Well, first of all, I think that it's a different version of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, right? It's just isolated on one person or a group of people, as opposed to like a Teens That Go. But it's kind of like, do you consider Silence of the Lambs a horror movie?
No, more of a thriller.
Yeah, so it's that it kind of lives in that
suspense, mystery, thriller. Yeah.
Yeah. So, although it does have, I guess the part of it for me that makes it horror over just a thriller is it has just enough science fiction to it. So it's probably more a science fiction movie that isn't thought of as a science fiction movie than it is a horror movie. But I still think it's great. Either way.
You know what horror movie's better than all of them?
No.
Thanksgiving.
No, it's not. No.
Yeah.
And it was either that or tire. It was going to be one, or rubber or whatever. Rubber.
No, Thanksgiving is better than Rubber.
I don't know.
I have not seen either of those movies.
Oh, Chris.
I know what you're talking about.
Rubber's very interesting. It's the killer tire.
Yeah.
It is so cheaply shot, but it has its moments. I'm just going to say it has its moments.
So it's the tire version of Taco Killer Tomatoes kind of thing.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. Just a spare tire gets psychokinetic powers and becomes sentient and just kind of rolls around and blows up. It starts like vibrating and then like blows up animals and stuff like that.
Gotcha. So it's like the baby version of Maximum Overdrive. Like they haven't quite taken over the whole car, but they've taken over a tire.
Right, but they got a hold of a tire, and they're really, really working it. Yes,
I gotcha.
And Thanksgiving is a homicidal talking turkey, follows 4 cliched college students home on Thanksgiving break and tries to kill them all. I mean, it's amazing.
It's like
the same story, right? Like
zombie.
It's the same story. It's like it's the son of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
It is. It's that idea of like, teens and kids, like everything's trying to kill them, whether it's my books or, Judy Blume or
it follows
or tires, like it's all there. So
it's all there.
Hey, Chris, did you ever do any research into like Centralia, Pennsylvania, with the whole Silent Hill kind of thing as to whether or not there was anything weird going on there? Or is it just simply the town that caught on fire? And
it's are you talking about the one that's, I know Silent Hill. Are you talking about like where they have those mines that are underneath the ground that are constantly on fire?
So the coal mines in 1962, somebody accidentally lit one of the coal mines on fire where it kind of came up to the surface. And that coal has just been smoldering ever since. And so they had to evacuate the whole town. But, there's been a lot of like day trippers that have gone there that have documented some weird stuff going on, even though it's obviously posted to stay the hell out of there for safety's sake because the ground's weak and given away. But I mean, so the whole concept is like, I loved the movie Silent Hill. I saw it in the theater and I thought it was absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, like, is that location, do you think because of what's going on in that location, there could be something like actually strange going on there?
Well, first of all, that is strange, right? Like, I mean, if you could just because you can say that there's some science behind it doesn't mean it's not crazy, right? Like,
right.
What's really weird is that in addition to an episode of Mr. Ballin and an episode of, I can't remember the name of it, that is the fourth time that's been referenced to me in like the last 2 weeks.
Wow.
So I don't know if there's just something in the air or something, some kind of smoke in the air about that. It's interesting. I think that like because we don't know like the before of that, right?
Right.
We don't know if there were ghostly legends kind of in that area before. And so no matter what happens from now until the end of time, anything that paranormal is going to happen there is going to be connected to those fires.
Yeah.
And then because it's so off what's normal for us, you're going to have the people who say it's a government conspiracy, and all these things. And so those kinds of things which happen and they're freak occurrences become the foundations for why we believe in ghosts and why we believe in the paranormal and why we're able to make up conspiracy theories, right? Because like this stuff shouldn't be able to happen unless someone orchestrated it. Or if this kind of thing happened there, what else could be happening there? So I really like to hear about those places, and then you start to hear other stories that are in the surrounding area that are connected to it. So I haven't done any specific research on it, but now something is telling me that I need to.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah.
It's pretty hard to light a coal mine on fire. Right? I'm just saying, right? Like it was like some kids that recklessly were just out like camping on the edge of town. And it was, like where there was like a little cave indention and the coal vein had come up to the surface and they didn't put the campfire out properly and blah, blah, blah. Right. And then all of a sudden now it starts this coal vein on fire. And now like it's hell under this town with this coal vein just burning and smoke. But it's been doing it since 1962. Like how big is this goddamn coal vein? Number one.
Yeah. I mean, we have.
Like how is it still burning 60 years later?
That's
a long time. It's still a long time.
In Florida, we have towns that are known for just constantly being on fire.
Well, that's Florida, though.
Because, well, I mean, the conditions are there for fires to exist a lot of time. Now, the crazy thing is that I think when I first heard it, and it wasn't the Mr. Ballin episode, it was the other podcast. Not that there are other podcasts other than yours. But it was I can't remember the name. I'm losing the name of it right now. But I remember typing the name into a search, and I think it's right near Duffy's Cut, which is another abandoned town in that area. So that's when you start to be like, is something going on that like something is keeping them from this area? Because this place, which was called Duffy's Cut, the story is entirely different. It's just all these people, miners who these forestry, lumberjacks who like someone might have killed them all, or one of them went crazy or something. It's a similar story. I don't want to say the details because I'm going to get them wrong. But I remember at the time when I was first hearing it being like, this isn't too far from Duffy's Cut. So I think what the story really is there's like, why is that whole section of Pennsylvania all screwed up? Like what's going on there that there are multiple stories of these abandoned towns there.
Right.
That we can track. It's not. You
can go visit today.
It's not like it's like Roanoke where it was happened like 1,000 years ago, so we don't know what's going on.
Right.
There's documentation. Yes, I know Roanoke didn't really happen 1,000 years ago.
It's far enough back though that it's hard to research.
Right. I mean, and
accuracy.
It was so self-contained that we don't have any records of the people of Roanoke. Whereas in those towns, we have very specific first-hand accounts that were written down that we know of. So
sure. Yeah, I mean, in 1962 is a hell of a lot more recent than Roanoke was.
It is. I was almost born then.
I was almost born myself. Yeah.
Wait, how old are you?
58. Close to being born.
Wow. Okay, so you were closer than me. I was just kind of
65.
65
is when I was born. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I wasn't even close.
No. No.
Yeah, I was just being nice. I was born in 75. So.
Yeah.
So speaking of Roanoke, because I mean, one of the things that we wanted to talk about with things, that you have researched and whatnot, and that's never been brought up with you. Dave and I have talked about Roanoke before, but have you ever looked into it?
My daughter is obsessed with Roanoke.
Well, get her on.
I really should. She could probably nail this. I mean, I'm familiar in it that I remember being like a 7-8-year-old and having the same obsession that my daughter had as a kid with it. Like, what exactly is this? And then my kids for a while, I shouldn't even say for a while, because if I put it on, they'll both turn into zombies. We're huge fans of BuzzFeed Unsolved. And BuzzFeed Unsolved had an episode on it. And they'll literally watch that episode like 5 or 6 times in a row, trying to crack what happened in Roanoke, as if they are going to like get the one detail that's going to piece the whole thing together. And if you've never watched that BuzzFeed Unsolved episode of Roanoke, you should watch it, because they bring in some interesting facts that even I didn't know about, like the maps and how the map was, like they discovered the map had been drawn over and stuff like that. You need to watch it. They're going to do much more justice to it than I could. But I love that, because I feel it's one of those things that's right in front of our face, that if you could click that one little thing, you'd get the whole story, and you'd be like, oh, I get it. That's just what happened. It's totally normal. Or it's totally explainable. But because we can't, because there is no documentation, because there are just enough elements. And that's a really good example of that bias, whereas if you think it was aliens that took those people, you're going to find evidence of aliens taking those people, right? And if you think it was like a zombie apocalypse, which is one of the going theories, which doesn't make any sense, there's enough evidence that says it could potentially be like a zombie invasion that happened and that became isolated to that island. And so I really love that idea. And we were actually going to take a road trip back in the day, one summer, and we had planned out, and we have a whole episode of the show where we talk about that. And one of the places we talked about was Roanoke, because my kids were obsessed with it. And so my daughter kind of got a choice and my son got a choice. And so my daughter picked Roanoke, and then my son, who was a lot cooler back then than he is now, picked tracking down the supernatural urban legend of the Allman Brothers. And so we were going to travel all the way up there, and then we were going to make our way to Mississippi and see if we could sell our soul to the devil at the crossroads.
Nice.
So that was like a whole trip we had planned that unfortunately then COVID hit.
And that's all.
And we had to settle for going through the book of, Ghosts in Your Machine and doing all those legends inside the house, which was its own trip.
Well, you could have gone to the crossroads, because it probably wouldn't have been that populated.
Yeah, it's getting from here to there. Like,
yeah,
I'm in Florida. Right. You know what I'm saying? Like, at that time, it was like so intense. Like, you weren't even able to like go to gas stations without wearing a hazmat suit and stuff. So it would have been tough to, and you couldn't stay anywhere. We've had to stay in the car. So that was the only issue with it.
Okay, well, you don't know this person, Chris, but Dave does. So we have a friend who just knows everything about like the spiritual world and like Bigfoot and UFOs and spirits and stuff. So I just asked her what happened to the people of Roanoke.
Yeah.
So we'll see what she's
and she said zombie aliens.
No, she hasn't responded yet. I don't know.
Zombie aliens. Now it's a hybrid.
Might as well combine little column A, little column B.
I think zombie beavers, because it's an island. There's probably a lot of beavers there, so I'm thinking zombiever. That's probably where the original idea for the zombiever movie came from.
Maybe.
By the way, have you guys seen that? Have you seen Zombiever?
I
haven't. You guys have a lot more free time on your hands than I do in life.
It's actually pretty hilarious.
Well,
yeah, it's horrible, but it's actually like hilariously funny. Horrible.
Yeah.
It's funny.
It's thanks killing horrible. Is what you're saying.
But with a beaver. Yeah.
But with a beaver. Yeah. So
everything is better with a beaver.
So there's an episode of Sleepy Hollow. which is a
That was a great show.
great show. Loved the writing of that and everything that dealt with Roanoke.
Yeah.
Where they kind of the whole Wonder Woman thing where there was like this cloaking type thing around the town. I mean, do you think that has anybody thrown any sort of thought processes behind that type of theory?
I've heard dimensional theories used. But not necessarily like a pocket universe. Like they're still Roanoking out Roanoke, like in some kind of parallel universe or some kind of pocket, like they've existed, and like because there would be more inbreeding than is normal for that area if they were in their own pocket universe.
Yeah, it would be.
But I have heard of Roanoke being like a slip between the two worlds and dimensions, and those people somehow entering another dimension and maybe even coming out someplace else. And that I can buy into. By the way, did you know Sleepy Hollow had a crossover with the TV show Bones? No. What's up with that?
I own Bones and I own Sleepy Hollow, and I've never seen an episode with them both combined.
There's an episode where they're doing their whole thing, and in walk the people from Sleepy Hollow. And from what I gather, it was a crossover in that there's an episode of Sleepy Hollow with Bones and Booth in it.
Nice.
Are you telling me no?
I'm telling you no. Now there might be an episode of Bones. I don't know every single episode of Bones, but I own the entire series of Sleepy Hollow, which I've watched 3 times. There is no episode.
Okay. They definitely were on Bones
with Bones and Booth.
I've seen the Bones episode. So
okay, then
because my daughter was like, "What the hell is this?" And I'm like, "I think this is that show that was on like Sleepy Hollow." And then we're big IMDb fans, and so I looked it right up, and it said it was a crossover. So crossovers usually mean that.
That they're
now be reciprocal.
Yeah.
Well, it was not. I assure you, because I would have lost my effing mind.
And it's a bad enough episode that it was one of the episodes of Bones that my daughter went online to see if anything important with the whole continuality of the show is important. And if it's not, she goes, "We're just going to skip it, dude. Like, this is just plain silly."
That was a nice try.
Yeah, there you go. So,
well,
while we're on the kind of roll here with like shows and movies and stuff, did you ever watch Fringe when it came out?
I literally am the only person who right over there, I have a t-shirt that says Massive Dynamics, and no one gets the reference. Fringe to me is one of the top 5 television shows of all time. I am so ridiculously obsessed. It goes like The West Wing, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Fringe and Lost, and then like maybe St. Elsewhere, which you guys are going, I don't even know what St. Elsewhere is.
I know what St. Elsewhere is. I'm like, my face is twitching because I can't even imagine why that would be on your list.
Have you watched first of all, okay, talk about the Blair Witch Project, right? Every single hospital procedural after St. Elsewhere is just doing what St. Elsewhere did in the early
Not House. House is amazing.
Really? I mean, I love House. St. Elsewhere, dude. Young Denzel Washington, Mark Harmon, Howie Mandel. Come on.
You lost me at Howie Mandel. Sorry.
There's an episode of St. Elsewhere where Howie Mandel gets shot.
Excellent choice.
And he goes through heaven, hell, and purgatory.
Nice.
And it is such a dynamic, amazing episode.
No.
And then, of course, he ends up meeting God, and God is him because we're a reflection of God. And so it's God Howie Mandel with just regular Howie Mandel having a conversation about the universe. It is crazy. And the whole thing. Now, if you want to, I'm looking at your eye right now, and anyone who's really to ghost and not this stuff is being annoyed and is turned off. But technically, right, St. Elsewhere is the foundation of Cheers, Homicide: Life on the Street, all of the Law and Orders, and like a few other the X-Files, right?
Ooh,
so
X-Files.
Okay, you're
if St. Elsewhere, characters from St. Elsewhere appeared on all of those other shows, right? So if you know anything about St. Elsewhere, it has one of the most surprising finales ever, where it's revealed that none of it is true, and it's all in the mind of an autistic child who makes up stories about the hospital as he's looking out the window waiting for his father to come home. That means the universes of the X-Files, Law and Order, Homicide: Life on the Streets, they're all in this autistic boy's mind too, which means they don't exist. Munch on that.
Yeah, I don't need to. That's just that's just terrible writing, is what that is. But it's just pre-Lost,
right? But like 20 years before Lost. Like how revolutionary?
I never watched Lost either. But
so anyway, Fringe, huge fan of Fringe. huge fan of J. I like, to me, even the Star Wars stuff, JJ can do no wrong. So, like, he's one of my favorite creators.
I'm going to agree that Fringe is very, very good. I've recently watched it, so it's very fresh in my mind. Loved the first 3 seasons. They lost me in season 4, and they very, very much lost me in season 5.
Much like Evil.
Much like Evil.
What I like about Fringe is every time you were comfortable with the series said screw you and did something to throw you off balance.
No.
And changed what it was.
It was just terrible writing.
All right. We will agree to disagree on this.
Yes, we will. And I will say this. It took us almost 2 hours, but we made full circle because we came back to Evil.
Right. I always try to bookend my things. So
but one of the last things that we're going to talk about, and it is kind of what you're doing, one of the things that you are doing now, and that is you are a guide at a ghost tour.
Yeah. Although I'm supposed to say haunted history tour.
Haunted history tour.
Very distinctly make it that you come for the history and get spooked a little bit. It's crazy. It's so I would never consider myself an alpha male, right?
I can see that.
But I definitely have realized that I'm a dominant personality, and that I kind of overtake situations that I'm in, right?
I can see that too.
Thank you. And I have to come to terms with that. So when the new year started, one of the things that I wanted to do was I wanted to be more humble, because I think in the paranormal world, you can get to a point where you've consumed so much and you've experienced so much, whether you're investigating or researching or all the stuff, where you can kind of get set in your ways and you can look at like a new idea and you can say, why would I even listen to you? You've been doing this for a year.
I don't know what you're talking about myself.
Yeah,
I guess.
Mike knows. Yeah.
And I found myself being overly critical of everything else in the paranormal that wasn't me. Right?
That's crazy talk.
I know. And so I was like that. I'm like, I don't want to be like that. Like, I don't want to be overly cynical about these other things. There's good stuff. There's bad stuff. Like, things should be consumed and then you decide whether it was good, right? Like, and so part of what I wanted to do is I wanted to surrender myself to someone else's story, right? So tell someone else's story and kind of like not think, right? And so I was asked to do this ghost tour, and there was a script and everything like that. And I was like, how cool would it be just to walk around for an hour and a half? Maybe I can take off some of this weight. Maybe I can meet some hot girls on the tour. Or at the very least, get people who are talking ghosts and maybe have a ghost story to share. And I don't have to think, right? Like, the ghost stories are already there. I don't have to research them. And it took me about a week before I had to rewrite the scripts. Because I was like, okay, it was written by like a 22-year-old waitress. And I've got no problem with 22-year-old waitresses. She's hot. She got like 5 times more tips than I do doing the tour.
Shocker.
But me and my partner, who, by the way, full circle, is that same woman who introduced me to the director of Blair Witch Project. We're now good friends. Her and I joined at the same time, and she herself is a writer and a filmmaker. And so we were like, these aren't stories. Like, they're just kind of, here's the history, here's a ghost experience, here's a joke to minimize and let's go to the next place. And so we actually ended up taking those stories and crafting them into actual ghost stories, right? And it was interesting because they're not interesting places, right? Like the tour itself, this isn't the Key West tour where you end up hanging out with Robert, right? Or the Savannah. I've heard the Savannah tour, ghost tour is really good. You were talking about there's a whole bunch in the Twin Cities. It's not a bad tour, but nothing happens, right? Like you can't go into any of the buildings. You can't really, some of them you can't even go on the steps. You have to do the story from like across the street. And so how do you have somebody understand what someone else experienced right there without them being able to go inside, right? And there are a lot of ghost tours that bring out equipment. There is now a competing tour in Fort Myers, which is hilarious. It's Fort Myers, Florida. That are, what's the U.S. Ghost Adventures? It's like essentially what it does is it's like this massive corporation. It's the one that owns the Lizzie Borden house now. It's like this massive corporation that just sets up ghost tours in every city in the country.
Ghost Hunts USA or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And so they send people out with equipment, right? And our tour is kind of like, it's history first. And we don't say anything unless it's been verified by at least three different sources, right? And so we don't make crazy claims, and we're not going in, and you're not going to get EVPs, and so how do you make that interesting, right? And so that was a unique challenge for me, because I'm walking around for 90 minutes in 90-degree heat with a group of people that could be up to 30 people, and I've got to keep them entertained, being like, see that building over there? Something happened. Like, here's the history behind it, and here's a ghost story. And so I really like the tour because it's almost like a comedian, right? Like when I'm speaking in front of a whole bunch of people, I've already gotten my money, like at a library, right? I'm hoping that they buy a book afterwards, but I'm telling a story, and if I can get a few people to like it, it's good. It works. When you've got like 12, 13, 14, 15, up to 30 people walking around a city with you, and you have to keep them entertained, and you've got to be faithful to the source material, but you also have to change it based on the attitudes of the people around you.
Reading the room.
Yeah, reading the room. It's a whole different game. Like last night I did a tour and there weren't many people, but at the beginning they had gotten there so early that we were just like shooting the crap, and everyone was extremely sarcastic, right? And everyone was kind of loving this sarcastic atmosphere that we were in. Well, how am I now supposed to go out and be overly serious? So on the fly, I had to bring out my natural Northeast sarcasm and like add that to the ghost tours, There's a really cool ghost tour story. So you probably have some place like this, but there's this street in Fort Myers called McGregor Boulevard, right? And McGregor Boulevard leads into, like, the end of McGregor Boulevard is the Thomas Edison Estates. So Edison is huge down here in Southwest Florida, right? Like, this is where he came and lived towards the end of his life. And, him and Ford became best friends down there and blah, blah, blah. So there are these huge estates called the Edison Ford Estates. That's at the end of McGregor Boulevard. Well, when they first made McGregor Boulevard, they had to find the material. And they had just come up, I shouldn't say they had just come up with, but this kind of texture and design where the water would slide off, right? And because if you're in Southwest Florida, like, it rains here every day for a few hours. So they had to find this very specific shell and rock. And so they went across the Caloosahatchee River to this place called Swords Island or Swords Point. And they started digging for this shell. And almost immediately they found skeletons, right? And so being Florida in 1913, they just dug up all of the graves, ground up all the bones, and laid down McGregor Boulevard. So there's all this crazy stuff that happens on that stretch of road, right? And so it's a great story. It was the only story I knew about this area where I live before I started doing the tour. Like, it's that infamous. And so I'm doing the research because I'm writing a book, Haunted Southwest Florida. And I've been doing the tour now for like 6-7 months. And in the tour, it says there are 108 skeletons, right? And so I'm doing all this research and I'm going back, and all I can find is the number 54, the number 57. Like, how the hell are we getting 108? We say 108 on the tour. The woman does her research. She's a historian. Like, she's not a ghost story person. I find a reference to 103. I'm like, okay, I don't really take the 103 number too seriously. Like, I'm good with the 57. The 57 I can prove. So if I'm going to tell the ghost story, like, but where the hell is this 108 coming from? There are a few references. And what had happened was someone had typed up the script and made notes on it and used it for so many years that the 3 looked like an 8. So the next person, because they never kept a digital file, who typed up the story, looked at the 103 and thought it was 108. And for the last decade, they've been saying 108 based on a clerical error. And if that's not the nature of friggin' folklore, I don't know what is. Right? Because crazy. I love that story. As the folklorist in me loves it. The paranormal investigator side of me loves, like the legend tripper side of me loves it, because you can go down that road and you can hang out with some ghost hitchhikers. No redheaded hitchhiker, but a ghost hitchhiker, right? You can go and you can, like, this other. It hits like all the different buttons, and it's really the foundation of like the history of Fort Myers is on that road. And so it's like that kind of stuff to me is really cool, and I really like doing the tour. Not so much the people that yell at me from all corners of the street, because it's a very active, like, lively area of downtown, and it's not like the homeless people or crackheads or meth addicts who are yelling at me. It's just like really drunk people who are in Florida for a vacation, who are coming from Michigan and Minnesota and Wisconsin, who then like are yelling at me from across the street, like, "Hey, ghost guy," like, and stuff like that. That makes it really fun. So
it sounded more like a Wisconsin accent than a Minnesota accent. Yeah. So I'm just going to say,
I don't know Wisconsin. That's why it's Minnesota and Wisconsin. I got them both. Them both.
You do.
You missed it. We had a whole thing about that before you came on.
Yep.
When you were still trying to get your camera working.
Yep. So, that does it for this episode. So, for anybody who wants to maybe come on the tour, who wants to buy one of your books, who wants to listen to, what's.
Do you think there's anyone after this 2 hours that still wants anything to do with me? That'd be great.
Yes.
Best place you can go, facebook.com/trippingonlegends. Trippingonlegends.com is the actual website. If you just type in, we're on every single platform from Spotify, iTunes, iHeartRadio. If you just type in Tripping on Legends or type in my name, you're going to find it. And then, of course, if you're looking for an autographed copy of my book, you can reach out to me on any of my social media platforms. But if
is there any other kind of versions of your book than autographed?
Well, yeah, if you just go and get it on Amazon.
Oh.
I'm not in an Amazon warehouse across the country signing my book, but
I just figured that you were just there when they came off the press, signing.
Yeah. Well, I try to be try to be everywhere at once, but unfortunately I have to do interviews with the audience.
Yes.
So I can't be.
Yeah.
I can't be in Hoboken.
No.
And
we forgive you.
And the next time you come on, you'll talk about your research into the Silent Hill area.
You giving me homework? I'm the teacher here.
I'm all right with that.
We're nudging we're nudging you softly in the direction of
Highly encouraging.
Centralia, Pennsylvania.
You guys are my muse. There you go.
Yeah.
And you are my inspiration, Mr. Balzano.
You give meaning to my life too.
All right. Well, that does for us this week, Chris. Thank you for coming on once again.
Thank you very much for tolerating me.
Oh, it's always such a pleasure.
Anytime.
We'll be back next week with another new episode. Until then, stay healthy, stay safe. We want to see you back here. Have a great night.